Are we headed into recession? Well, if you believe the malarkey and the alarmist extremism that you see all over the internet, you'd think that we were headed for a major economic collapse and some type of societal meltdown. I don't believe that's the case at all. But if we are headed to a recession, which is likely, it's been a long time since we've had one, then one of the best economic indicators that I'm aware of for predicting a recession is the unemployment rate. Let's look at this chart that comes from Macro Trends. And you can see that this blue line right here is the unemployment rate. Now these gray lines that go vertically indicate a recession. Over the last 60 some years, we've had about 11 recessions. And so on average, a recession occurs let's call it every 7 years or so. Now sometimes recessions come quite more frequently, and you'll see that right here in the late 70s, early 80s. We had kind of two back-to-back recessions. Other periods, though, are characterized by extreme lengths of expansion. Now the 80s expansion occurred during a Republican, Ronald Reagan. The 90s expansion occurred during a Democrat, Bill Clinton. And so whether we're in or out of a war, whether we have a Republican or a Democrat in the White House, those things are quite insignificant for determining a recession or an expansion. What really is the key to determining a recession is the unemployment rate. Look at this chart and you'll notice that anytime the unemployment rate makes a bottom, the country goes into recession. It's happened every time. And so I believe the best indicator of whether there's an impending recession is the unemployment rate rising from a bottom? And what's important to identify on this chart is you'll notice that it doesn't matter what the unemployment rate is. Here in the 1950s, the unemployment rate was at about 2.75. It was the lowest in history. And yet, as soon as the rate started going up, the country went into recession. The same thing was true in the 90s. The unemployment rate was a very reasonable 5%, but as soon as it started to tick up, the country went into recession. So every time we hit a bottom, we go into a recession. Well, look where we are right now. We're at about as low as a rate as we've gotten over the past 20 years. And while certainly the unemployment rate could drop down to something like 3%, we have to assume that at some time it is going to start moving back up. And so my recommendation to you is you ignore all the gloom and doom and all the hype you hear about economic collapse and how bad the economy is. And what you should focus on is watching market and economic indicators, and in particular keep a close eye on the unemployment rate. And if it starts moving up, you can darn sure bet we're probably going to go into a recession. If you'd like to hear more about my stock market commentary and my general wealth building principles, then please join me on the full version of the Wealthsteading podcast that's available on iTunes or all the normal places you'd find a podcast. You can also find it at wealthsteading.com. Until the next time, this is John Pagliano wishing you the very best returns.